Sonic Racing Crossworlds. To be honest, I think it'd be pretty reasonable to say that it's one of those cases of a game that not only do I not enjoy at all, but also that I feel very highly confused by its very positive reception. If I'm being honest, I feel like I'm in a parallel universe compared to the vast majority of people online, Sonic fans in particular, let's not kid ourselves. As a Mario Kart competitive player, in particular Mario Kart 8 Deluxe and World, with 3,000 hours spent in the first one, Sonic Racing Cross was a pretty disappointing game to me, and pretty mediocre, not at all deserving of a 9 out of 10 by IGN, or the very high user review score that the game is receiving on Metacritic. What makes it even more surprising, at least to me personally, is that a lot of fans of the game would seem to think that Sonic Racing Crossworlds is a lot better than Mario Kart World, game which, without exaggerating, I consider one of my favorite games. So yeah, in this video I'd like to give you my perspective on Sonic Racing Crossworlds, Mario Kart World, and at the same time explore why this game has resonated with so many, but not with me. Before starting, I think it's important to clarify for those Sonic fans that might need it, that when making this video, I'm not trying to say that your opinion on Sonic Racing Crossworlds or Mario Kart World are invalid. I like to make it abundantly clear that as long as an opinion is based on factual information about the game, its game mechanics, I think it's excellent that people come to different conclusions on those same facts. It's all subjective after all. What I like to do with this video is offer my own perspective, and while I'm at it, talk a little bit about the ways in which Sonic fans talk about the Crossworlds vs. World situation. It's completely valid if you love Sonic Racing Crossworlds and you don't like Mario Kart World. I just like to offer you with a different perspective on both games. Sonic Racing Crossworlds, as I said at the start of the video, feels pretty disappointing to me, mainly because, and this might make a lot of fans of the game angry at me, it honestly feels like it's a simple copy of the Mario Kart games but with Sonic slapped on top. I'd like to clarify that when I say copy, I don't mean it in a pejorative sense, but a descriptive one. It's not the same to not like the game because I consider it a Mario Kart clone, and to call the game a copy as an insult because I didn't like it. Some of you might tell me that just because it's the same genre as Mario Kart, that doesn't mean necessarily that it's a Mario Kart clone. However, I feel like this logic is one that deeply lacks imagination. The genre of Crossworlds, Mario Kart, Sonic R, Sonic Riders, Crash Team Racing, etc. is a mascot racer. And a mascot racer doesn't have to specifically be like Mario Kart to truly be a mascot racer. It doesn't have to have all the characters and vehicles while they use items. That's just the way Mario Kart did it. Sonic used to have mascot racers that were distinct from Mario Kart and were unique. Specifically the games that I mentioned earlier, Sonic R and Sonic Riders. And while it's true that these games are not for everyone, even if I do love Sonic R, I think Crossworlds perfectly could have been a game that isn't like Mario Kart, but instead offers a completely unique experience from it that only Sonic can offer. In fact, some of the bigger problems that this game has come from the fact that it's not trying to be a one-to-one copy of Mario Kart, but to be more precise, a reinterpretation of Mario Kart that doesn't understand its core fundamentals. While it's true that playing online there were various instances that the game rewarded me for using my items intelligently and saving them for the right moment, the item balancing is very poor. In fact, some of the items they added to the game would seem to have been added because they sounded like good ideas, without consideration for how their functionality would affect the race of other players. Items like the Warp Rings or Slicer, which are items that the game warns you about so you can dodge them, while they have basic counterplay, that being that the player can choose to avoid the attack so it doesn't remove their items, the problem is that the game doesn't offer basic counterplay for a more problematic issue that these items cause, the fact that they remove player agency. If the player can't for some reason utilize a specific gadget, which we'll get to talk about later in the video, the game presents you with a use your items now or lose them all situation, which is antithetical to games of the same genre. Games of this genre are about preparing for lap 3. Laps 1 and 2 are preparation, so in lap 3 you're in the best situation to win the race. The issue that I noticed with items like the Dark Chow, Slime, and Slicer is these items precisely take away from the player's agency to decide when to utilize their items, being that if they don't utilize them to dodge these, they'll lose them. This is something that takes away from the player's ability to plan ahead and win the race. Let's suppose that a player was hit at the beginning of lap 1. A player that knows what they're doing could normally utilize their bad position in the race to get items that try to come back, utilizing these items in key moments in the race and getting back to first place. But this doesn't just remove player agency from players bagging, it also takes away from players' agency at the front of the race. Let's suppose you're in second place, and you get a Wisp and Shield. The most optimal play, depending on the situation, would not be to utilize them immediately, but rather to save them. Stay in second place, wait until first place gets hit, and put yourself in first place with both items that can dodge both the Wait and King Boom Boom. The problem, as mentioned before, is that the game can take this away at any time, once again taking away agency from the player, robbing them of the opportunity to put themselves in first in an advantageous position. However, while it does put you in an advantageous position to dodge items like the slime with powerful items while everyone else goes way slower, the issue that I see, once again, is that this takes away the ability for the player to utilize their items in their desired place. To be fair, it's true that Mario Kart also has items like these, and on top of that, these don't even warn the player unlike Crossworlds, items like the Boo or Shock. However, the difference that I see with these items is that these are items that the player can plan ahead for them coming. The Boo is as simple as just holding an undesired item in your first item slot, a coin, a single mushroom, and having your desired item in the second slot. While the Shock is something that the player can predict if they have enough game sense. They have to put themselves in the mind of last place, and not only think if there might be a Shock in play, but also think when said player might utilize it, when it'd be the best situation for them to do so, or it depends on who you're playing against. That's the beauty of the Shock. You have to put yourself in the mind of the player and predict their next move, because maybe they won't use it strategically, maybe they'll use it without thinking, or they might try to be unpredictable on purpose. This is already interesting how it works in Mario Kart World, in which there can only be one Shock in play, but it's even more interesting in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, in which there can be 3 of these in play. So not only it becomes a matter of guessing where the player might use the Shock, but for a player with it, it becomes a situation where you need to utilize your Shock in the best way possible before someone ruins your plan, creating a risk-reward factor. Do I save the Shock for later, or do I use it now? Crossworlds, while it tries to imitate this dynamic of risk-reward, you took the risk of using an item and dodged the Shock. Due to how the game warns you of its items, on top of how a lot of them have set functionality, there really is no risk to take, because the player is always warned of these items, and the reward is lesser because the game made them use their items in a compulsory manner. Something that's worth mentioning in this section, although this explanation is already pretty long in and of itself, is that Crossworlds does allow for the same type of counterplay that you specifically do with the Boo for the 3 items mentioned, even without the previously mentioned gadget, but with some issues that don't solve the issue of removing player agency entirely. Let's explore this in order, shall we? In the case of the Warp Rings, as mentioned previously, majority of items, except attack ones, can dodge attacks incoming from it. The problem is that if you don't have an item that comes in multiples, Triple Wisp being the only one that can dodge these and come in multiples, and if the Warp Rings come more than 3 times, which to be fair would be a pretty rare event, you would have to use your saved up item. And due to the fact that there are multiple Warp Ring items, these can appear multiple times per race. But if that was enough of a problem, the Slicer can be an even bigger problem for a player trying to counterplay this ability of the Warp Rings and save up their items. The Slicer removes your first item slot if it hits, and while it's true that you can dodge a Slicer by taking tight turns around walls, you depend strictly on that being an option in the race. If a player has a Slicer behind you, you're saving up Triple Wisp which can dodge a Slicer, and there's no walls around you, your only option is to pump the brakes and let them pass you. Crossworlds, while it does have those rare moments in which it rewards you for strategic play and making the most out of your situation, due to its chaotic nature, it's even more common than Mario Kart that something that removes your control happens. All of these decisions make Crossworlds a game a lot more focused on simply running forward, without much opportunity to catch up in a race if things are going poorly. A lot of casual players like this way of playing games like Mario Kart, in which you only drive forward and leave your destiny in the hands of the game, and that is completely valid. However, personally, I'm someone who prefers that the game gives me agency over my race. Some of you may be yelling and screaming at your screens right now because I have yet to properly address one of the biggest counterplays to what I'm talking about, the Item Keeper gadget. As the name suggests, this gadget lets you keep your items when Warp Ring attacks happen and from the Slicer. Despite the fact that this gadget would seem to be like the perfect solution for a player like me, I have an issue with it, or well, multiple. The issue that I see with this gadget is the fact that, very much like the items in question existing because of a misunderstanding of the genre by trying to reinterpret it, this gadget's existence seemed to stem from another misunderstanding of trying to reinterpret the genre. As I said earlier, games of this genre are all about preparing for lap 3, but they're also about player flexibility and adjusting to the situation accordingly, making the most out of it. And, this is important, the ability to change strategy at any given moment in a race matters a lot. In this game, there's a lot of talk about being able to make specific builds using gadgets that adjust for specific playstyles, like for example making bagging builds, making attack item builds, making acceleration or mini turbo builds, and many others. The issue that I see here is that a lot of the time making these builds doesn't allow the player to play in such a way where they can be a generalist in a way that games of this genre demand. You can only seem to specialize in specific categories, meaning that if you're ever in a situation where your build is out of the specific situation you built it for, you're basically a fish out of the water. You can make a generalist build if you want, including the item keeper gadget, and you can try to use the item keeper gadget with specific builds, but the issue I see is that the item keeper gadget almost becomes compulsory if you don't want to lose your agency, which I don't really see as a particularly good design, because it means you're going to have to use 4 slots instead of 6. Don't get me wrong, the idea of a Mario Kart game that lets you specialize in any specific category as a reinterpretation of Mario Kart is pretty good, and it is what Crossworlds is, even if we'll get to issues I have with this system later on. The problem I see is that I think the game would be better if players could, regardless of their build, have the agency to choose and change strategy, not rely on a specific one they specialized on, being able to play as a generalist without needing to cater their specific build to that, and being able to specialize their build without having to compromise their agency. I see that issue more so than anything. That gadget would seem to just be an annoyance to any player who wants the game to not rob them of their agency, because it means that they can't specialize their build as much, when obviously items that rob you of your agency as a player shouldn't exist, and a band-aid solution like this one shouldn't exist either. I'd like to make it clear again that there's nothing wrong with making your game similar to Mario Kart as long as it's good at doing that. What I question here is why the decisions that the designers of this game took would seem to be in favor of making the player having to choose if they want agency of all things. The game doesn't just try to reinterpret Mario Kart without understanding its core fundamentals, but it also sometimes comes off as a shallow copy of it, thanks to things like the inclusion of Mario Kart style double item boxes to the game, or the similarity of a lot of its tracks to Mario Kart's track selection. All of these decisions that they took would seem to be specifically to make the game similar to Mario Kart 8 Deluxe in particular. Tracks like Chow Park, also known as Baby Park, Colorful Mall, which is literally Coconut Mall from the Booster Course Pass, E-Stadium, which reminds a lot of Mario Kart Stadium, Aqua Forest, literally being Wild Woods. I could go on. And look, I like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe as you could probably tell already, but I hope you can understand why I don't like Crossworlds. Not only because it tries to be way too much like Mario Kart at the expense of offering a unique experience, but also because on top of that mechanically, it's not really a very unique kart racer. The fact that it's trying to reinterpret Mario Kart, poorly might I add, is not really a good thing. A question that I would constantly ask myself while playing this game was exactly what reason do I have to play this over Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, Mario Kart World, or the previous Sonic racing games? Because here's the thing, the game's mechanics are extremely basic, even more basic than Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, although I don't think Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is as basic of a game as many people would like you to believe. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is a simple game, but with a lot of driving strats, it has a lot of shortcuts. As an ex-competitive player for it, I can tell you guys that it's a lot more complex than people make it out to be. But getting back on track, Crossworlds simplifies a lot of mechanics from previous Sonic racing games and makes it even more basic, possibly in an attempt to make the game even more like Mario Kart. This is something that I feel warrants mentioning, because while I'm not that big on Sonic and SEGA All-Stars Racing, Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed, or Team Sonic Racing, I think these games offered things that separated them enough from Mario Kart to justify their existence, despite already being derivative from it. Transformed introduced the mechanic of charging mini-turbos through more than one drift, on top of the stunts with the right analog stick that not only give the player more speed when landing, but also on top of that help the player position themselves in the air to choose where they want to land, not to mention that if you started a stunt too late, you wouldn't receive your speed burst. Team Sonic Racing, despite all of its problems, introduced cooperative play through these golden paths, which would have been pretty fun to play with friends if the game had only had crossplay. Crossworlds not only simplifies the trick system so it no longer moves the position of your vehicle in the air and doesn't punish you for starting a trick too late, making it funnily enough a lot more similar to Mario Kart, But also the cooperative playing as seen specifically in Team Sonic Racing with its golden paths and sharing items with other players is also missing. And the game just simply does not have any addition that separates itself substantially from previous Sonic Racing games or Mario Kart. However, the simplification of game mechanics also makes the game more accessible for newcomers, this being one of the reasons why I think the game has resonated with so many people. Now, to be fair, Crossworlds does add things to try to distinguish itself from other mascot racers and previous Sonic Racing games. However, the key is in the word try. The extreme gear are one of the additions to the game, for example, with the boost style. But these play too much like karts in my opinion, and it's not the type of innovation that these types of games need to separate themselves from the competition. If you want it to be favorable to Crossworlds, you can say the difference between the extreme gears and karts is the same difference as inside drifting bikes and the karts from Mario Kart Wii, but this comparison would be, honestly, too favorable in my opinion. Another one of the additions to the game are the titular Crossworlds. These, while being interesting conceptually, and create a reward for taking the risk of being in first place, being at first place is the one that picks the Crossworld, these are most of the content changes to what you're playing and not so much changes to its gameplay. It is worth mentioning that in regards to the Crossworlds, there's the Frenzies, events which the player can choose, and the game randomizes between 3 static buffs to your vehicle: charging turbos faster, receive constantly regenerating white wisps, or that dash pounds appear everywhere. But in the same way that I'm going to elaborate with the gadgets, while these change the gameplay minimally, they are not substantial changes that justify this game's existence in my opinion. Finally, there's the gadget system. This addition is a little bit more interesting, but it also doesn't do enough to supplement the lack of unique game mechanics. The gadgets are little tools that the player can use that most of the time give your vehicle, or in general the player, static statistic buffs, like charging mini turbos of specific levels faster, receive items of any type more frequently, and many more. However, aside from the fact that the gadgets are interesting to experiment outside of races, and to think which would be your best personal loadout, the gadgets never offer any type of substantial active improvements. Only some of them do, like this gadget that makes it so you gain speed by bumping on other players. Rather, the gadgets, as I said, are mostly passive improvements, not active ones, meaning that they don't add the game mechanics to the game or substantially change the way that you play it, which is already a simplified version of Sonic Racing to resemble Mario Kart. But while it's true that the passive gadgets do allow the player to do things like snaking, and some of the active gadgets add some neat game mechanics like swapping first and second items, there's never something as substantial as being able to do stunts and move your position in the air, make charge jumps and ride on walls, or add more involved trick system to the extreme gears. Did they expect something like that? No. That would have been extremely unbalanced. But because the active gadgets have to be gadgets, they can never be a game mechanic as interesting as the ones of old that would carry an entire game. And for that matter, because of their optional nature, they can never design courses around a specific mechanic offered by a gadget, since players not using said gadget would be at a huge disadvantage. In the making of this video, I've been told that a lot of passive gadgets are a lot more interesting than I give them credit for. Like for example how the speed item gadgets take up more slots than the other item gadgets because it facilitates strategies like bagging, or how passive gadgets like the mini turbo gadgets allow the player to do snaking as mentioned earlier. However, I still take issue with these, because while it's true that depending on how the player wants to play, there may be a lot of different gadget combinations to experiment with, these specific examples are things that don't separate the game substantially from any other mascot racer of its genre. This is the problem with the gadget system. While an interesting concept and allowing the player to choose how they play, it can't and shouldn't have been a replacement for the game having its own unique driving mechanics to make it stand out from other Sonic Racing games or Mario Kart. It's a cool addition, but it should have been a companion to a new more substantial mechanic to the game, not its main attraction. Again, I personally don't like Crossworlds. I feel like it's a mediocre racing game. A game that tries to be everything, and therefore it's not excellent in any particular category. It wants to desperately be like Mario Kart despite the fact that it doesn't understand why Mario Kart is so great to begin with. So as a Mario Kart game, it doesn't really do it for me. But that wouldn't be a problem if it also wasn't bad at being a Sonic Racing game. Because in its desperation to be like Mario Kart, they removed many of the elements that made Sonic mascot racers distinct from Mario's. even the ones which already resembled them. While they brought back the extreme gears, these do not play the same way as their game of origin, where they offer the gameplay style completely different from Mario Kart. Do I enjoy Crossworlds? In a superficial sort of way, yes, but it's not because of any new substantial additions that it makes to the game that separates it from other mascot racers, or is anything new to iterate on the formula. I enjoy it superficially, in the same way that a toddler enjoys having keys jangled in front of them. Given this perspective, you might now understand why I find it so confusing when I saw many people tell me that Crossworlds is apparently way better than Mario Kart World. Mario Kart World is a game which I've been playing this last month, and I do have some critiques toward it, but similarly to the situation with Sonic Racing Crossworlds, I feel like I'm in a parallel universe to many people discussing the game online. The consensus around Mario Kart World seems to be that it's a boring game, that the intermissions are boring, and according to some videos online, that the entire game is as boring as driving to work. However, I have some problems with these types of videos. I'm not the most experienced Mario Kart World player, and I don't pretend to be, but I am someone who is learning the competitive ways of the game in the same way that I did with A Deluxe. And guys, Mario Kart World is one of the most mechanically rich car racers I've ever played? Mario Kart World is, as I said, one of my favorite games, and there's a reason. This game is incredible. It's mechanically super fun, it innovates on the kart racing genre in incredible ways. It's without a doubt a game which I'll be playing for hours and hours, possibly just as much as what I did with Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, possibly more. Some of you might try to mention the intermissions of the game, although even the competitive community has seemed to take a dislike to these tracks. I'd like to clarify for this next bit now that if you're a competitive player, what I'm about to say isn't directed towards you. If you try the intermissions genuinely, you gave them a chance, and you didn't like them, that's perfectly fine. No, my problem is with other types of people, fans of another series in particular. Oh my dear Sonic fans, I don't know where this need of yours comes from, where every time that a new product releases around the same time as one from your favorite series, not only do you feel the need to attack the competition, but also the need for your product to win, as if it were team sports. I'm going to talk about this phenomenon later on in the video when I talk about the practices of both Nintendo and SEGA, but for now I'd like to just say this. I think it's extremely unproductive to pretend that the intermissions are as bad as many people who haven't even played the game would like you to believe. There's videos like the one I mentioned before, the Mario Kart World vs My Drive to Work video, which have thousands of views and likes, and it's not because the creator shows the possibilities of what you can do in the intermission. It's because the player decided to literally play in the most boring way possible. And that wouldn't really be a problem at all really if I didn't see so many people who haven't played the game, Sonic fans in particular, act as if it's representative of the entire game, when it's not. On top of that, I must say that I think a lot of players genuinely would seem to not even want to give intermissions a chance. If we see videos like the ones mentioned before, this is pretty analogous to bad faith arguments Sonic fans have had to deal with for years, like Boost to Win. Boost to Win is precisely the idea that Sonic Boost games in particular, at least in Generations, you can beat the entire game by holding down the boost button. And I'm sure you know what I'm about to say. Just because you can do it, that doesn't mean that's the fault of the game because you're not taking advantage of its mechanics. Something I'd like to make clear as well is that I also don't think the only valid way to play World is competitive 6v6 or anything crazy like that. It is my favorite part of the game. I just think a lot of people like to pretend the intermissions, while yes, are a big part of the casual experience, don't have any depth whatsoever. And I ask myself once again if these people are even trying to utilize the mechanics that the game offers you. Now, something that I think is worth mentioning, since it's based about understanding different perspectives, is that I understand perfectly why many people don't like Mario Kart World, beyond its price and beyond the people who have tried intermissions in good faith. And it's simply the fact that the game is extremely hands-off when it comes to teaching you these mechanics. While this doesn't represent a problem for me, I understand that a lot of players aren't going to have the drive or time to experiment in such a way and would prefer a much simpler game, and that's fine. However, I do think that one thing is critiquing the intermissions for being boring and not taking advantage of the game's mechanics, when clearly the game mechanics are always available to the player, and another thing is to criticize the game for not teaching you how to exploit those mechanics. That's constructive criticism that's completely valid. A tutorial could have helped this game a lot. I don't think Mario Kart World is a perfect game or anything like that. It definitely deserves to be criticized that the intermission tracks are a really big part of the main online mode's experience. But unlike Sonic fans, I don't assume that the game is dead online just because worldwides aren't as active as they could be. Mario Kart World's competitive scene is booming. In October, we'll have the first instance of the big tournament that's played in Mario Kart Competitive Play, Mario Kart Universal or MKU, and Mario Kart World already has more than 120 teams registered. The first Mario Kart Universal of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe only had 42 teams according to the official page in Mario Kart Central, of which to sign up to a tournament, each team needs to have minimum 9 registered players. That's not a game with a dead online, it's a game which has a flourishing online scene, even bigger than Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, one of the biggest competitive Mario Kart games there ever was in terms of player count. What's more, while I don't think Nintendo deserves any credit for this, casual players have found a way to play online how they want, with things like the Mario Kart World Discord server, which already has 60,000 members. That way players can choose to play only the 3-lap tracks with friend lobbies. But even if Mario Kart Worlds' online was fully dead, that doesn't remove from the fact that there's a difference between this problem of Mario Kart World and the problems of Sonic Racing Crossworlds. The problems of Crossworlds are fundamental, but the ones of World aren't. The problems of Mario Kart World are problems that don't take away from its mechanical complexity. They're issues that can be solved by patches, since they're not a problem of the actual video game you play, the design of its courses and its game mechanics, but rather the lacking quality of life options that don't let players play how they want. While on the other hand, patches can solve the problems of Sonic Racing Crossworlds, because that's how the game was designed. The game doesn't need patches as much as it needs surgery. And ironically, as if on cue, while I was making preparations for this video and thinking about this point, Nintendo made a patch for Mario Kart World, mitigating somewhat the issues with worldwides, which shows that they do know about them and are willing to fix them, bringing back some life into the game's main online game mode. Many of you might tell me that Mario Kart World is too expensive of a game compared to Sonic Racing Crossworlds. However, I think what a lot of Sonic fans don't realize is that Crossworlds is almost just as expensive as Mario Kart World, with a difference of only $10 for the base version of the game, unless you buy Crossworlds on Switch 1, which would make it a difference of $20. Many of you might tell me that SEGA, unlike Nintendo, does do price cuts and discounts of their games, and that's true. However, saying that this comparison is invalid because of this, I feel is a pretty binary way of thinking that doesn't question how price cuts and discounts work for the games in the first place. A price cut or discount is always based on an initial price. So yes, we should complain if we think a game is too expensive for what it's worth from the start, precisely because every future discount and price cut will be based on the original price. Let's suppose Crossworlds is $70 in Universe A and Universe B is $40. A 30% sale in both would make it so in Universe A the game would be $49, whereas in Universe B it'd be $28. Whether we want it to or not, MSRP matters, because it doesn't matter if you wait for Crossworlds to be at what you consider a more reasonable price. If you wait for a sale whether it's $40, you could have gotten a much better deal where the game appropriately priced from the start. I'm not looking to justify Mario Kart World's price. Personally, while I do think $80 for someone like me who is going to play the game for thousands of hours is much more than worth it, I do understand the average person isn't like that. I do think the game is overpriced. But at the same time, I can't say I'm really much of a fanatic of the idea of upholding the shitty business practices of one multi-billion-dollar company just because a different one you like less is doing something bad too. Nintendo and SEGA both have to be held accountable for doing shitty business practices. I don't care which one you consider the lesser evil, they're both doing bad. I'd argue in very similar ways. And I'm here to point out the fact that Sonic fans, and broadly many gamers in general, have pointed to the shitty practices of Nintendo, like raising the price of their games exponentially and not lowering their prices, while not critiquing Sega for doing other terrible practices too. Not only that, but blindly praising them in the process. Things like the Digital Deluxe that Sega offers you for Crossworlds, frankly should not exist. Something many people like to omit is the fact that Crossworlds' Digital Deluxe is actually more expensive than Mario Kart World. And I know what you might tell me here. Curious, you don't need to buy Digital Deluxe. That's true. But you know what the issue is? The Digital Deluxe they're offering for this game is the same shitty deal Sega has been doing for all of their recent Sonic releases. Imagine if Sonic Colors Ultimate released and they removed the Planet Wisp remixes and other features of the remaster to sell them back to you as Digital Deluxe. Imagine if Sonic Origins released and they removed the ability to zoom into the islands as well as other features and sold them back to you as Digital Deluxe. Now imagine if Sega made crossover characters for the brand new racing game, which is what people are most interested in about the game, and then sell them to you in the base game, but rather remove them, including exclusive tracks, and sold them back to you as Digital Deluxe. Except, you don't need to imagine any of that, because it all happened. I'm sure you're going to tell me that the fact that these are other companies' characters means that they have to make them Digital Deluxe. But in that case, I don't understand how Disney characters like Ralph were available in the base version of Transform to begin with. And while this is based on my subjective experience with it at the end of the day, I do think even $60 for Crossworlds would be too much. Given the amount of content that it has, 27 3-lap tracks and 15 Crossworlds, counting the Digital Deluxe, and the quality of said tracks as well as the overall gameplay experience, I think I'd personally only really ever be okay with this game if I had paid $40 for it, not $60, much less $70. Again, this isn't to justify Nintendo's practices, but rather to try to show that upholding Sega as the beacon of pro-consumer practices that many people want them to be is frankly irresponsible in my opinion. Especially because Mario Kart World might be $80 when it should be $60, and it's true that that's unnecessarily expensive, but at least it's sold honestly and without putting extra content that was already made before the game even launched behind a paywall. As one last point to mention, some of you might tell me that Mario Kart World is actually $500 and not $80, since it's an exclusive. However, this logic is not only pretty bad in my opinion, but it's also selective. Nobody would tell you that if someone didn't have a way to play Crossworlds, that if they bought a pre-built PC for $1,000, that Crossworlds costed them $1,070, because people intuitively understand their PC is going to be used to play many more games than just Crossworlds. The same applies to a Switch 2. A Switch 2 is not a Mario Kart World machine that explodes if you try to play any other game on it. Not only does it have other exclusives, and it will have more in the future, but it offers the best way to play many Switch 1 games. On top of that, this is selective logic, because I've never seen someone say, for example, that Astro Ball on the PS5 is more than $500 because it's an exclusive. Don't get me wrong, I dislike exclusives as much as everyone else, but you know what I dislike more? When people don't have consistent values, just say whatever's more convenient for them at the moment. I'm sorry if this video might have been pointed to those fans of Crossworlds watching it, but I hope you can understand that like all of my videos, this is just my personal perspective, and I don't pretend it to be anything more. I suppose if I had to close this video with some final thoughts, it'd be this: don't consume commercial art uncritically. I can say everything I said about Crossworlds and Mario Kart World because I know what I like and dislike about the game. In that sense, I know why I like Mario Kart World so much, and why Crossworlds doesn't inspire much confidence. And to be clear, thinking critically does not mean agreeing with me. It means thinking why you like or dislike a game. That's to say, not only think that you like a game, but why you like it. I'm a Sonic fan, as strange as it may seem after everything negative I had to say about Crossworlds, but I can say the things I said about it because I think critically about why I felt this way about Crossworlds. The truth is, I think Crossworlds and World are worlds apart. I'm sorry that makes you mad, but that's how I feel. And it's not in small part because Mario Kart World is a game mechanically super complex, super fun, and Crossworlds is sincerely one of the most forgettable kart racers I have ever played. It doesn't innovate in any substantial way, it doesn't have an identity, and that's why I don't feel like I have a reason to play it over games like Sonic R, Sonic Riders, Crash Team Racing, or Mario Kart World. The main problem I see with Crossworlds right now is that it seems like it doesn't know what it wants to be. On the one hand, it wants to be a reinterpretation of Mario Kart without understanding its core fundamentals. The fact that I can plan, adapt to a situation, and respond to what happens in the race. Mario Kart gives me agency without compromises. On the other hand, it wants to be an improved sequel of Team Sonic Racing and the Sumo Digital Sonic Racing games, but it's also terrible at doing that. But how it is right now, Sonic Racing Crossworlds is, to me, highly disappointing, and its problems are too fundamental for me to just let them go. However, that's just what it is to me. So I ask of you, use your critical thinking. Would you say the reasons I dislike Crossworlds are the same reasons you enjoy it? Or is there anything I missed? Share your experience. The last thing I want is to be the last word of the discussion. Thanks for watching.